we're going to move on to our third session now. You'll love this. This is all about the Ministry of Habitation. And for them, we are told digital transformation may now, at last, be a possibility.
Even before the COVID crisis, the Ministry of Habitation was already long overdue a modernisation programme. Its IT estate remained heavily dependent on ageing mainframe computers running complex benefit applications, which were deemed too risky or too difficult to modernise. This in turn meant that digital initiatives to introduce home working and online application for benefits and grants had huge obstacles to overcome. Recent projects to take the ministry forward had been either cancelled or indefinitely postponed due to changes in the ministerial responsibilities and the pressure of Brexit. As a result, the Ministry of Habitation maintained 821 offices across the country, providing workspace for its civil servants and face-to-face meeting points for the public. The annual cost of this estate was more than £430 million, and so there was considerable potential to make significant savings through modernisation. Only when COVID struck did the pressure for change become overwhelming. Civil servants working from home struggled to keep the ministry running, and for the first time there was overwhelming demand from the public for it to offer all its services online. The Permanent Secretary, Ian Cuthbert, and the senior leadership team understood that COVID had brought them a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform the ministry. Enabling home working would solve long-running recruitment issues at some of their key centres, and the savings that could be made by substantially cutting the ministry's portfolio of offices would make modernisation practically self-funding. Crucially, the public had shown, by their openness to use track and trace apps, that their attitude towards privacy, confidentiality, and trust had changed, which meant that there was now a real appetite within the Cabinet to push digital initiatives through. As planning for a rapid modernisation of the ministry gained momentum, Ian Cuthbert understood that one major obstacle still needed to be overcome: the digital divide. The ministry would be able to deliver its services online, and these would be used by the vast majority of the public. But what about those people who were unable to access the internet, or who would simply refuse to? How could society provide for them without compromising the prospect of creating a more resilient ministry, one that would offer better working conditions for its civil servants, operate at a reduced cost base, and deliver more agile and effective solutions to the public? Cuthbert knew that unless he could provide a viable solution to the digital divide, the project would become too politically toxic to maintain Cabinet support. But what was the solution?
And does Ian Cuthbert get knighted at the end of it and become Sir Ian Cuthbert? Who knows? Right, so, we're talking about government here. We know the huge, actually we probably don't know the huge challenges that government are facing, but we certainly all know and see the implications of what's happening around us in so many ways. And if you're working in the public sector area and have experienced challenges like this, then do particularly throw your thoughts through anonymously if you like. But let's have your input in on this, because I think this is a really important one that clearly at the end of the day affects all of us. So while the pandemic has had many negative effects on a lot of organisations and how they run, the question really we're looking at here is, has it brought that seed change in trust? We were talking about trust earlier, and also confidence in digital services that actually will accelerate the process and the progress into digital government. Mark, you work a lot with the public sector. What are your thoughts on that and what you've heard?
Well, Michael, I know it's hard to believe, but I've worked in the IT industry into public sector for 37 years. And I have never in my entire career seen such a rapid change as I have over the past 8 months. Certainly public sector bodies, in particular in the UK, who adopted cloud over 7 years ago, have been embracing digital technologies, but that has really accelerated this year. And so not only have they had to address their own digital transformation, as we've been talking about, the move to home working, but government's had the double whammy, if you like. They've had to also address us, the nation, and all the issues that we as a nation face companies struggling to survive, more benefits required. So there's a real pressure while the organisations of public sector have had to relocate to home, but also then there's even more demand. Chancellors stand up and make announcements of schemes to help us all, and then it's these public sector organisations, such as in this case study, who have to then implement these very fast, within days and weeks. And that is underscored in this case, I think, by the reference to legacy technology, which we'll come on to, I'm sure. But the reference here, it really means that the organisation will struggle to be agile because it has legacy technologies that you can't suddenly change overnight. They've been built bespoke for that organisation because much of what government does is bespoke. There is only one tax collecting agency in a country. There is only one welfare delivery agency, depending on the structure of the country.
And of course, we talk about government, and yet it's all these different silos sometimes, yes. Different systems and so on.
Yes.
We'll come on to talk about that, and a question's already come in. Come to those in a moment. Do keep thoughts coming on this one. The phrase that came up in that, the digital divide, Margarete, you may have thoughts on that. It's an odd expression, an old expression. It's been around for quite a while. Do you believe the digital divide is real? Does it still affect us in a big way?
Absolutely. Like, I don't think most of us, I'm sure, are in no doubt about the divide. I think there's lots of families that don't have access to devices, they don't have access to high-speed broadband. I think in many ways we've got lots of people that don't have the digital skills, right? Our elderly community, our vulnerable community don't have those skills. So I think that divide, if anything, this pandemic has exacerbated that divide, actually. And I think a lot of us as leaders are quite mindful of it, and we're trying to bring some level of equality to our customers and our partners and the surrounding society near us. But I think that divide is very much real, and very much real in the UK. And so we have an obligation as tech leaders to really try and bridge that divide and make it more accessible for everybody. And I think the telcos are working quite hard on this as well to bring fibre optic cable to communities and homes. But we know that there's lots of families. I have friends that have one device and they're working with their children, homeschooling them, and have been on one device at home, and they've 3 kids working off one laptop. So that's got to change. We've got to make sure that this technology is democratized and made accessible for everybody. But it's not just the devices, it's also the skills, right? And that capability and using this time to really upskill people. We see that with the take-up of home banking, online banking. I know my own parents, they were quite old school, wanting to write checks. Now they're kind of getting used to using an iPhone and navigating around that. But that divide is there, and this is the time to really try and put some inroads in there to really break that down.
Yes, isn't that interesting? Because perhaps we thought the digital divide was gradually getting less and more people were gradually getting used to digital. But then what you're saying is that the huge amount that now is in digital has left that community completely outside.
Yeah. And we forget, right, because we're all in a very privileged position. So I think it's an onus on us, really, as leaders, all of us, to kind of think of others that are not in as fortunate positions, and really to say, how can we support, how can we build an outreach program to really connect them up? Because we want everybody to have access to these services and to accelerate this digitalisation. So it's very, very real. I don't have the stats to hand, but I think we can see there are some major gaps around capability, technology, networks, Wi-Fi, all of that.
And clearly, as we talk about particularly the public sector, and please your thoughts on this one, the digital divide is really important. But Melinda, do you think the digital divide influences the strategy of organisations outside government?
Certainly. I think everything that Margarete just pointed out, I think it absolutely impacts how organizations outside of government think about how they reach their customers. If they have a consumer-focused product, when you talk about digital transformation, digitization of changing business models on how they interact with customers, provide customer experience, that digital divide can absolutely impact the ability of them to reach their market. So it's absolutely a concern from a customer perspective and a business perspective, but then also a broader societal perspective of companies caring about the digital divide and looking to close it, and looking at technologies and investing in the areas of the economy where we need to close that digital divide.
But isn't there a danger in terms of the digital world that there are haves and there are have-nots? And actually, the companies want to trade with the haves and maybe aren't bothered about the have-nots?
Well, I think that's a very short-sighted viewpoint, both from a business and a societal perspective. I think that, we talked about it, actually, there was a question earlier about can we have a completely digital economy? And with the digital divide the way it is today, the answer is no, because we can't possibly have a completely digital economy without bringing up those who don't have technology access or the ability to participate in everything that we're advancing today at such a rapid pace. And I do think you can see with the pandemic and what we've dealt with, both at work and at home, that digital divide is much greater because there's people that just are not able to participate. It's a true challenge at keeping jobs, at taking care of their family when you don't have access to critical needs in your life because you're not a digital user. So I think it's probably a very short-sighted approach from a business to not care about the have-nots, and we have to figure out how collectively we close that gap. And it's not an easy answer.
And even from a business point of view, there's still a potential market out there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let's move back to the public sector. Clay, do you think that COVID will be seen as the moment that the public allowed digital government, embraced it, encouraged it, accepted it?
I mean, time will only tell, but we have seen evidence of it. So if you think about all the things that have transpired, so we've gone and we've shifted, if you think Ministry of Justice, right, in the UK, so we've gone to online and virtual tribunals, to virtual juries. Not saying that that's going to be that way, all along, but it goes back to what Margarete said about trust earlier. So there's a new evolution of trust that's happening, and I'd almost make the analogy to when mobile phones came online, and everyone said, no, the quality isn't going to be good enough, right? Well, nobody talks about that anymore, right? They get on with it. So we've seen that change, right? We've talked about healthcare. People used to say, well, no, I'm not going to get remote care. Well, now everyone gets remote care because it's that or nothing. So that's evolved. The same thing that's also happening in universities. But what we're also seeing, and this is where we get really exciting, is if you go cross-department. So you start looking in social care and health, and now the opportunity almost like digital to combine the two for a better outcome really becomes something that's powerful. Now the question is the imperative behind Brexit and COVID enough of a catalyst to go make that happen? And I can't tell you, right? I don't have that crystal ball, but it would be the moment if there was going to be one. And
also whether there's the political will for departments to work together. I mean, health and social care, that's sort of in the political agenda, isn't it? To go, should we pull those together a little bit?
Yeah, and we're seeing evidence of it, and certainly, I mean, not to get into politics, but we're seeing a drive towards that, and to break down some of the boundaries, as it were, inside of Whitehall. But it's early days, and it takes sustained change, and there are good reasons for why it is the way it is right now, and having ownership, clear ownership of something. It does have value, right, as we all know as business leaders. And now being able to share that ownership and share the problem, then you become into a whole new set of agency issues. But it's happening, right? And people's attitude towards trust, right, has fundamentally changed.
And that's what we come back to, isn't it? It's the attitude, the trust, and so on. Okay, first question coming up. Should we do a poll? Yes, we'll do another poll. Should we do a poll?
With some Jeopardy music.
Okay, yeah, no, absolutely. So let's do another poll then. Okay, coming up on your screen, if you press your button, you'll get another question. We'll find out what your answers are in just a moment. I know you'll see them on your screen in a second anyway. But while you're doing that, let's take this question. I've not read it. Let's see what it says. What advice would the panel offer to the public sector to expedite a return to the office where that space is more traditional and less innovative in its current use? So the offices that are just more crowded and more old in their style and so on, haven't had the chance to update and so on. Mark, Melinda, both looking interested there, but Mark.
I'll give an answer to that. I think clearly now there's a need to reconfigure offices. So that's the first thing I would say. There's going to be new ways of working, which will enable, for example, civil servants to choose which office they go into. It won't necessarily be fixed by whichever department it is. And so, but that takes some time to reconfigure. So there's going to be some physical building, some physical reworking. There's networks, Wi-Fi's, identity is a big issue, because if you're moving around, then Employees need to have a clarity of who their identity is, so as the systems behind them can assure that they have access to those various systems and the data. So there's a lot of work to be done. If you look in industry, you can see organisations that have done that. So the technology is there. It will just take some time to implement that. However, we have seen that as human beings, we can get these things done quick if there is a need to do it. So there is no need, in my view, to make this a lengthy multi-year change. This should be, let's aim to get this done within months and set a timetable and aggressively work to do that.
But the question, interestingly, talks about what advice would the panel offer to the public sector to expedite a return to the office, almost as if a return to the office is a good thing. And at the moment, I mean, a lot of government offices, it's simply a case of putting hazard tape on every other desk and it's kind of job done.
Well, actually, I think it comes back to the earlier point a little bit. The digital divide is one example. We clearly need to address the digital divide, and it is an obligation of government to really focus on that, particularly in areas such as healthcare, social care and the welfare state. And one way of addressing that more effectively is to give it more capacity in the system. So if you're moving the people like us who are quite capable and not part of that digital divide online into a digital environment, that gives the government and the organisations more capacity to address those that are in the digital divide. So sometimes you clearly need to be face-to-face. And if you move the rest of the population, it always comes back to the 80-20 rule, to the online world, and then you can focus your face-to-face resources and the offices that you have. They have a lot of offices in this case study. Do they need so many offices? There might be a need to reconfigure those, but that will give them the capacity to address the digital divide more.
And there is a reason to think then, do we need to expedite a return to the office in quite those terms? Melinda, did you want to add something there?
No, I mean, I agree that I think you have to, there's a couple different implications to expediting the return to office. And I think, again, we've had a couple of conversations around, in some aspects, that'll be a really welcome thing, and in some aspects, a resistant thing. And I think that, again, making sure, there's this thought process around making sure, now that people have been working from home, that the capabilities at the office are just as good from a technology perspective, but then also you're creating the environment within the office of why are we coming there?
So the advice is make sure the environment technologically at the office is up to it, make sure there's a reason for people to want to go back.
To go back, and there's
where appropriate.
Yeah, there's opportunity. And why are people going to the office? It's to collaborate. It's to work together. Are there opportunities to do that in the facilities that exist, or do those need to be created?
Advice?
Yeah, so don't make it a knee-jerk. Plan ahead, because we've done a survey to say, well, what's going to take for people to become comfortable, and it's really consistent, right? So they want to be safe, and they want to know the people that they're caring for are safe, right? So two different issues. And they're worried about public transportation, right? Those were the three overwhelming things. And so what you can't do is just snap and say everyone comes into office next week. So you've got to have a systemic change program towards getting people feel comfortable, right? So have them see the office, know that they're going to be safe when they get there, know that the IT is going to work, but don't flip the switch on Monday morning, and say show up.
Introduce them.
Show up.
Margaret, thoughts on that? Introduce them to a new environment.
Absolutely, and I think we've learned lots of lessons here, but I think this is going to be an iteration as we go. So I think there's another nuance to this, which is, and some studies have shown, how do we make sure it's equal, right? So you have those that want to come back into the office, those that want a hybrid setting so they can go in or they work remotely, and those that want to stay at home. How do we make sure we don't create these little cliques within those areas? So those that come into the office, have face-to-face and they advance further. So culturally, we need to be really mindful. This is where real leadership comes into its own. There's all these kinds of technologies, including the thermal vision solution, that can make sure that those physical workplaces are safe. But I think culturally, we've got to think hard about creating that collaboration and equality, right, for those workforce that want to remain at home, those that want the hybrid setting, and those that really do want to return into a safe, secure office space.
Yeah, okay. Right, should we have the result of the poll?
Yeah.
Okay, so question, which is your favourite person on the panel? It wasn't actually. Okay, the question was, now this is really interesting. Who said there was, I think a couple of you specifically said there is a digital divide.
Yes.
Yes, so you did, didn't you, Margaret? You did. So we asked our audience, is there a digital divide in the UK? 100% of them said yes.
Oh.
that
encouraging.
perception is really big.
Because I have met some leaders that said no, so I'm encouraged to hear from all these leaders that they all agree. Yeah.
What do you take out of that, hearing that everybody with us says yes, there is a digital divide?
To me, it actually says, when you have that kind of overwhelming response, is that there's actually a strong desire to probably close that divide. That it's, it's recognizing that divide exists, and with 100% of the leaders listening in on this, recognizing that, I think it puts us in a really good position to solve some problems. That's my initial reaction.
It also says that everyone knows someone
Yeah.
in that digital divide. Someone in their family, a neighbour, a friend, whatever it is.
Well, deal with this then.
I think before we go to that,
Okay.
I think also having to understand what actually that means, right?
What the digital divide means.
What it means, because to address and get the best out of the employees, to address the market, if you're trying to serve that market, you have to understand it. I won't articulate and suggest I do, but definitely part of it is access to technology and connectivity. At least another part of it is being able to use it even if you had the connectivity. And the thing that's really been overwhelming actually about COVID is actually some of this vulnerable community that have had no choice but to go online, right? So you better hope they had connectivity, but people have been ordering from Tesco for their groceries, Ocado for their groceries that have never ordered online, but they've been forced to do so because they can't leave, right? So there's a pretty fundamental thing, but again, their attitude then shifts. So they start then saying, wow, actually, this online thing isn't so bad, right? And you've just opened up a new market, right? And has big implications for public sector as well.
But of course, they felt there was a wish and need, there was an impetus for them to do it, wasn't there?
Didn't really have a choice.
So they had no choice that they wouldn't eat, but that's the way to do it, obviously. Yeah. Here's a statement somebody's made, well, a thought. Most people use Facebook and Zoom on their mobile, and Estonia is an e-economy. So digital divide is a thing of the past when lobbies are not prevented from happening. Few things in that. Anybody accept that actually, I mean, clearly somebody who didn't vote there.
Well, I would say that the digital divide is perhaps less than it used to be when technology first arrived on the scene and the early adopters of smartphones and so on and so forth. So the gap has certainly narrowed, but I think it will always be there. Estonia is often used as an example of digital transformation in public sector. It is a smaller country. They still, obviously, I'd be surprised if they don't have some form of digital divide there. But it's probably not as pronounced as somewhere like the UK with 60+ million folk and all the history and the legacy and the challenges and the geography as well.